That's a nice way to start the podcast, with the sound, the flick of a Bic lighter. Jonathan Hannon, ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Hannon. You and I met 2 years ago when I was here in Galway doing the comedy festival, and my wife Ashna and I, we love knowledge and history, and whenever we can and we find it interesting, we like to take a walking tour. And you are the man in Galway, Ireland, who gives the fantastic history tour.
Well, we do. How you doing? Thank you, Tom.
Is there a special name for this tour?
Yeah, we're called walkinghistory.ie, and this tour is called Words of Revolution, because people are really interested in revolutions, but not all revolutions are about bombs and guns. And this is a revolution that occurred in Ireland through the Cultural Revolution of the late 19th century and through the flourishing of the Irish state. So I'm talking about writers. The great Irish writers. When you land in Dublin Airport, they're not going to show you pictures of soldiers. They're going to show you pictures of Samuel Beckett, James Joyce, Sean O'Casey, Lady Gregory, and the great, amazing John Millington Synge. So this is who we are.
I like that. That's what caught our attention. I believe that it was your Revolution tour, and it's more... your revolution is art and literature.
Absolutely, yeah. And what we do is there's 1 million tourists in Galway. It's a very, very busy place, and so we're trying to do something completely different in the sense that we don't go to anywhere that's conventional. We like to go to back streets. So what we're doing is we're visiting theatres, and then we're using these physical theatre spaces and old buildings in Galway to open up the story of the emergence of an Irish psyche. A great Irish academic called Benedict Anderson, who was actually the professor of anthropology at Columbia University. And he invented this amazing idea called the imagined community. And this is a lot of talk about nationalism right now. But when it comes to topics of nationalism, he's a social constructivist, Marxist thinker. And this is his particular spin, that we imagine what it means to be Irish. So in Ireland, we created this imagining process through literature and art. At the end of the 19th century, as one part anti-politics, which of course is a very political move. So I'm talking about Lady Gregory, the founder of the Irish literary movement, whose family hailed from Galway, were a distilling family from Galway, and the friendships and connections she had with other movers in the early literary movement, primarily William Butler Yeats, the great grand poet of Romanticism, and another Galway man called William Martin. And from this comes what we now have today is the Abbey Theatre. So Tom Rhodes, you tour the world. I guess you've read a lot of romantic poetry, and I guess there aren't many schools in the USA that don't teach William Butler Yeats.
Oh my God, I was reading romantic poetry by Yeats this morning.
Yeah, and he's fascinating. He's definitely the weird uncle at the wedding.
That's all Americans can talk about is Yeats.
Yeah, now of course he was a romantic, and he turned. I mean, literature at the beginning of the 20th century.
But okay, now for my listener, define the romantics and the romantic period, because I've never read Yeats. I have a fascination with Lord Byron because he was
the king of
He, aside from being, very powerful with his words and influencing so many generations, he was kind of like a Jim Morrison rock star guy. And he went his time in Italy, he's screwing his brains out. It's like the life of Lord Byron fascinates me. But other than that, I don't really know anything about the Romantic period.
Well, Byron's death was at the Greek Civil War. So the Greeks,
he died there.
He died in Greece, fighting in the Greek Civil War.
Get the fuck out! I never
He's serious, man. Yeah. And
are you serious?
And
he was a pimp.
Well, he was a lot of things, but he was a romantic death to go to Greece and to die for classical art. And of course, the emergence.
That was why he went there.
Well, yeah, but you see, at the beginning of the 19th century, at the early part, I think it was 1806, the great Gottfried von Herder, who was a German romanticist writer, and he wrote a book about the emergence of the organic community, which comes through language. And it's from that we get nationalism. The French Revolution, which you're an expert on, there was no talk of nationalism in that. That was a Republican revolution. There were Republicans, the Jacobins, the Girondins, so on and so forth. And then in the 19th century, we get the creation of states. and states are created through nationalism. So this created a flourishing in literature, poetry, art, and particularly in philology, the creation of individual separate languages. But Romanticism means different things in different places. So, the great Italian poet Jacopo Leopardi, he was imagining this evolving Italian nation, which was eventually came about with the Risorgimento after he had died. In Britain, you had Lord Byron, William Blake, but you also had the artists Constable and the great Turner. A lot of French and European Romanticism comes as a reaction to modernity and through industrialization. And 12 million people were moved from the countryside into cities at the beginning of the 19th century in Britain. So, 1,000 years of village life, art, customs, language, individual colloquialisms was all gone. And the great cities of, Bradford and Burnley and Derby and Manchester and Birmingham were created. And Romantics were people that reacted to this. But that reaction was different in different places. Here in Ireland, we didn't have an industrial revolution like that because the Irish economy was built to supply food to these growing cities in Britain. In Ireland, Romanticism came from a cultural fallout from the famine, from a loss of language, a loss of identity, and this idea, informed by Romanticism, that if we lost our language in Ireland, then we would not be a nation in the world. So, the consequences of that was what had played a large part in the Romantic movement in Ireland towards the end of the 19th century. So we were trying to capture a world that was about to disappear in many regards.
Okay. And how is that connected to the Irish Writers' Revolution, Arts Revolution?
Well, basically, constitutional politics was tried for a wee while at the end of the 19th century, and the emergence of the Irish Parliamentary Party, the first cohesive parliamentary party bloc within Westminster, led by the great Charles Stewart Parnell. His fall down meant that a lot of people turned their backs on politics for the next 10 years or so. This also coincided with the emergence of the arts and craft movement in Great Britain, Art Nouveau throughout France and Europe. So all these ideas were coming along. The emergence of modern art. Dublin was one of the world's first modern art galleries, the Hugh Lane Gallery, now the home of Francis Bacon's studio. So, Dublin and the world that Joyce populated and wrote about was at the centre of a lot of these changes. It manifested itself in drama primarily through the work of John Millington Synge amongst others. So our process of imagining who we are did not come through the military, it did not come through empire, it did not come through industrialization, it comes through an artistic cultural flourishing.
Well, and that's the greatest resource that Ireland has is your art and music, literature.
Yeah.
It's you're the shining star.
Well, and that's you have to kind of hold the balance as well, because of course, like many people, I'm cynical towards politics, and that's the spin creative Ireland that the government are hacking into right now to sell us on the international markets and so on and so forth. But it is true, and I'm going to say something outlandish, Mr. Rhodes, that the greatest romantic poet and the most read poet today is Yeats. The most important novelist of the 20th century is Joyce. And I will say that the most important dramatist, or certainly one of the most important dramatists of the 20th century, is of course Samuel Beckett. Now, is it a coincidence or that they all came from the same time and space? They all inhabited the same world and left their mark.
And this was in the Romantic period. In a reaction against industrialism.
Yeah, but where Joyce and Beckett come in is that Joyce was, as Sylvia, we were talking about Sylvia Plath and those people, she said that James Joyce stood in the doorway like a grand monument primarily to himself. He was convinced of his own genius at a very young age. He was published at 14.
Wow.
On Proust.
Wow.
I mean, that's a remarkable mind. The Jesuits, his father had an ever-decreasing fortune, means he had a lot of money and he drank it all. And the Jesuits educated him from 6 years old in Ireland's most elite school, Clongowns Wood. And when he was 12, they threw him out because the dad couldn't pay the fees. And in the following year, they took him back again to a day school in Dublin called Belvedere. They said, no, we got to educate this guy. So he was published at 14, and then when he went to UCD, comes out with a degree in classics and literature, and he thought that this romanticism was preposterous. It was ridiculous. These people talking about fairies and ghouls and monsters and all that, you know. They were engaged in what they called a Celtic twilight. And of course, Joyce, being the smart arse that he was, he called it a cultic toilet. And so he separated from
But
romantics.
the Celtic Twilight was what? This period of writers?
Natural flourishing of light and the re-emergence of this Celtic identity, which is and that happened right across Europe, in the Basque Country, in Catalonia, in France, and they all imagined what this was in different ways. In Ireland, it comes through romantic literature.
But I mean, Ulysses is a tough read. Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
I've given it 3 attempts. I've never gotten all the way through it. I like the idea of it. I like what it's all about. Ashna and I went on a walking tour in Dublin like 10 years ago, and there's the line when he asks the woman, what's her, Nora, to marry him.
Yeah.
What did she say? I do.
Yeah, but is he?
What did she say exactly?
I can't remember exactly.
But it's something like that.
Yeah. But that's Nora Barnacle, who's from here, who's from Galway.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that.
She's the strong female personality.
So on your walking tour, and I'd never been to that little charming spot in Galway, where you take us on the walking tour. So she lived there, and Joyce would sit down there, and he would sing up to her.
No. Okay, there's the.
It's been 2 years since I took your tour.
Okay, so first of all, Joyce was a remarkable musician and a remarkable tenor. And he competed at the highest level of opera and opera was a big thing in Ireland. John McCormack famously beat him, the great singer tenor Count John McCormack, although that is debatable. The thing with the singing to the window was Joyce's first masterpiece really was a portrait, and the second collection of short stories was Dubliners, which is a collection of very interesting, very strange short stories, and it's an imagining of Dublin. But the thing is that the last story in the book is The Dead, and that is the most famous in the collection, and it's about a man living in Dublin with his wife Greta Conroy, and one night she tells him the story of her first love. Now this is Nora Barnacle, and when Nora grew up here in Galway, her mother threw out the dad in 1900. Get out. He was an artisan, travelling baker, and an alcoholic, and an idiot. So she ran.
Let me guess, a drunk?
A drunk. Get out. But for a woman in 1900 to have that level of agency, to say, get out of here, man. They lived in 2 rooms on the back street here in Galway. She lived between there and her uncles and her grannies, all within a 5-minute walk. Chaotic childhood. Very tall, beautiful, very striking, long red hair, big blue eyes, and a dominant, powerful personality. Joyce had a fascination with female sexuality, but up until he met Nora, it was not anything that he could control or do anything about. He was mostly visited prostitutes. He went to the Sorbonne, spent most of the time trying to find Lautrec's old haunts, and so on and so forth. So he meets this woman called Nora Barnacle. But before she left Galway, she had 2 very intense relationships. One was with this young man called Michael Conroy. And his family had a shop, a business in Eyre Square, just where we have just come from. And Ireland was founded, the new Irish state was founded by not a theocracy, but a shopocracy. So shopkeepers were the petty bourgeois of Edwardian Ireland. And the family broke up their relationship over concerns of class. She was uneducated, from a back street in Galway, poor family, no father, blah, 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 blah. So the night they broke it up, the legend goes that he came down and he sang her songs of unrequited love to her window, and on the way back home, it's Galway, so he got wet, really wet. Big storm came, went to bed, wet head, became pneumonia, became tuberculosis, and he dies. After that, Nora had a relationship with a Protestant. Bad move. She had to leave, went off to Dublin, and then she meets James Joyce. Now that is the most famous day in literary history. That is the 16th of June, 1904. The day and that is the day that informs Ulysses. So they had this very intense relationship that developed. We have all the letters, we have all the contact. It leaves nothing to the imagination, and they travelled and roamed around Europe for the next 30 years together, between Paris.
And she was from Galway.
She was from Galway, yeah. She was from here. But she told him that story, and that story of her first love is the inspiration for the last story of The Dead. The other thing as well is if you take on Joyce blind and take on Ulysses blind, you're going to kill yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, watch the documentaries, do a bit of background reading of the man, and there's a great...
Well, but one time coming to Ireland, I found a side book an Irish friend of mine gave me, and it was like to read it while you're reading it.
Yeah,
Ulysses, like a kind of a guide.
Yeah.
So then it's like 2 books at once.
Yeah.
That's pretty complicated.
Well, that book is...
I like that it's everything happening in Dublin in the same day. It's the universe of a city and all the different stories within it. And then it's kind of loosely modeled on the framework of Homer's Ulysses.
Yeah,
right.
Homer. It's the modern. It's the birth of modernism. So he turned his back on the Romantics, and he said the modern world is coming: automobiles, pilots, planes, architecture, and lifts, and elevators, and machines, modernity, and that's the world that he was facing into. So this is the modern day version of the Iliad, and the character looks rudely at women, farts in public, his wife has affairs, he eats like a pig, he is likeable, he's unlikable, he's everyman. He's not the romantic mythical hero. No, that's not like that. This is the dawn of Jung and Freud and people like this. The consciousness was coming, so it was to prepare people for the onset of the modern world, that we're all flawed, no one's perfect, and Joyce's character, Leopold Bloom, who was Jewish actually, was the epitification of this new coming modern man, etc., etc.
Oh. And where does Molly Malone fit into this?
Molly Malone, that's a song, man. She wheeled her wheelbarrow through
She's not in the book.
and narrow. That was the statue.
I was doing good until those words just came out of my mouth.
Well, the statue in Dublin was cast by an American artist with Dublin roots, Reinhardt.
That statue, and she's got like low cut shirt, and her large breasts are hanging out. Like, number one, the weather wouldn't allow that, and number two, she's selling cockles by the seashore.
There you go.
So, how many, Playboy centerfold movie star looking large-breasted women are selling
cockles by the seashore?
Cockles.
Yeah,
she would have been placed better in society if she looked like that.
Well, the other thing as well is that's a lot of information I was giving there, Tom, about Joyce and all these things, man. And but when you take the tour, it's done in what I'm doing is taking research that goes on in the university, a big healthy dose of Mr. Benedict Anderson, all the field day anthologies, and making it in a funny, kind of quirky way about how the imagination is built of what it means to be Irish.
Well, I loved your tour, and that's why I want people listening to this to take your tour. And the thing that made it was great was your personality and your enthusiasm. I told you I just did these 2 walking tours in Paris, a literary walking tour, and the woman was terrible. She had no passion for the story. I knew more about these French writers than she did.
Yeah.
And then the next day was this French Revolution woman, and she was a historian, and this was her passion.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing is you're a historian, and this is your passion.
But facts
so
matter.
I've been coming to facts do matter,
yeah,
regardless of what my president says.
Well, yeah.
I've been coming to Galway for 20 years. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and it's so small and compact.
Yeah.
And I didn't know all this history until I walked around with you.
Yeah, we unpacked a lot of history as well because, myth is a very powerful thing, and myth really is...
Myth, not meat, people listening. In
myth.
Meat is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, it is, man. But myth really...
The Mongolians know it well.
It's my professor in the college explained myth and superstition to me as psychotherapy for a pre-modern age. Right, so
wow,
myths, yeah, and he was an amazing guy. So he basically, Dr. Lilo Kisson, he taught us how people lived and understood the world before the onset of, industrialization and so it's really like, what does witchcraft mean? What does it mean to have stories like Dick Turpin? What do these mean? But myth is always to tell you what to do and what not to do. It's got a message in there. It's a
morality.
It's a moral tale generally. So when you look at a lot of the myths around Galway and start to unpack them, the story that's underneath is often way more interesting than what your conventional understanding of a building, a place, or a time is.
Okay, well, let's talk about let's talk about some things you talked about on the tour, and just some things that I find really fascinating about Galway. But before we kick into that, for people who've never been to Galway, I always describe Galway as it's a university seaport village artistic enclave. I always tell people if you were gay or artistic in Ireland, you would move to Galway.
Yeah.
I love Dublin, but Galway's my favorite place. If I had a shitload of money, I would buy a place here. Is how much I love it. So the street with all the shops on it, oddly enough, called Shop Street.
Yeah, it's really William Street.
That's what it originally was?
It's William Gate Street.
Okay, who was William Gates?
Well, it's the gate at the very top of the city where you go up through the main street. There was a big citadel gate there because it's a medieval wall that ran around it up until it was pulled down. And William is, of course, William of Orange.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he was the guy that defeated the Jacobite forces in Ireland in 1690, and it's from him we get unionism and the current Brexit impasse. And they built the gate and they named it William Gate Street.
How? Because William of Orange is the founder of Holland, and why the Dutch wear orange. So how is he connected to Brexit?
Because now the Brexit, Theresa May's government is being supported by a group of people from Northern Ireland called the Democratic Unionist Party.
And these are the people who do their orange parade.
And they're orange men. Yeah. And they followed the tradition of William of Orange, who was actually a closeted homosexual as well. He never produced an heir, so there was an interesting time. Yeah.
Take that, Dutch people.
Yeah, well,
the Dutch, all the Dutch people I know would enjoy that.
Well, yeah,
they'd be proud of that.
Yeah, well, he never produced an heir, and after that come all the Georges and the House of Hanover, and that's why that happened.
Okay. At the top of Shop Street, it always brings me so much joy to walk down this street because there's music jumping out at you everywhere. Every 10 steps, there's a different busker playing music, and some of these guys are incredible. Just some of the greatest street musicians. And then
it's a profession.
There's all the happy memories I have of 20 years and who I've been and my life, the course of my life. There's just, I get this real homey feeling when I come here and walk down Shop Street and do shows here. At the top of Shop Street is a statue of Oscar Wilde sitting on the bench.
Yeah.
First of all, he's sitting with someone. Who's Oscar Wilde sitting with?
The other writer is, when the accession states, the Eastern European countries joined the European Union in 2004. Each accession state presented a piece of art. So this is a Latvian writer called Eduard Wilde. So it's an Estonian writer and an Irish writer talking to each other on the day that the European Union expanded to 27.
Ah.
Yeah, so it was to do with...
So when was that put up?
2004.
Okay.
2004. A lot of people are confused and say, what's Oscar Wilde got to do with Galway? Oscar Wilde has got a lot to do with
so
Galway.
I didn't know there was a strong... You and I were talking yesterday. Yeah. And that's what I want to know. What is Oscar Wilde's connection with Galway?
Well, first of all, the great Irish polemicist writer Colm Tóibín has a new book out, which you'll love. It's called Mad, Bad and Dangerous, and it's about the fathers of Oscar Wilde, James Joyce and Yeats. And they were all mad, bad and dangerous, all three of them. But Oscar Wilde's dad was a badass. He was a surgeon, he was an artist, an antiquarian, he was a Freemason. I went to see his grave in Mount Argus in Dublin, and it's covered in Masonic symbolism. And when he graduated from med school, he came to Galway. And he did this very famous walk from around Lough Corrib, which is the largest lake in the Republic of Ireland, 18,000 hectares, and that's where all the water that flows through Galway City comes from. So it's a good walk around it. And you're heading into the heartland of deep mystical Connemara. And he wrote a book called William Wilde's Corrib, which you can download and get on Google Books for free. And he wrote myths and drew pictures and, took down stories from local people. So then he bought a house later on up on the Lough Corrib called Moytura House. And this is where Oscar would have spent his summers.
So where did his dad get his money from?
His father was a surgeon. He was a medical doctor from number one.
And he had time off and money to travel here and just ask people about local stories.
Well, this was just when he graduated college. Just before, he kind of wrote it in stages over his life. But essentially he was rich. He was a surgeon and an alcoholic and a very hard man. Wilde's mother was a deeply intellectual woman. She was a journalist and she wrote under a pseudonym from various radical Republican newspapers, the Young Irelanders, of the mid-19th century, and they were inspired by Ezzione and the Risorgimento in Italy, and she wrote under a name Esperanza, Hope. And so she was a very formative figure in his life, and he would have spent time here in Galway when he was a teenager himself, Oscar, and when he was in college. And I am informed that there's a house not too far out of Galway called Castle Ellen House, owned by a beautiful eccentric man. And Oscar spent a summer there with his friend from university, Edward Carson. And
so now there's a great story, and I didn't know it until you told me yesterday. So this Carson guy, where's he from?
Okay, so Carson's from Dublin. He's a Protestant from Dublin, a fluent Irish speaker, went to Trinity and was a great hurler. And but he was a unionist. He thought that Ireland should not be separated from the British Union. And when he was a younger man, he was at university with Oscar, and they knew each other quite well. He went on to become a very eminent lawyer, King's Counsel, and during the First World War, he was the senior counsel to the cabinet.
But let's see about this piece of information first. They vacationed here together
when they were young, yeah.
Like when they're like elementary school age.
No, I think it maybe when they were in college, 18, 19.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Young men.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Wilde went to London, and
that makes what's coming worse.
Carson became a lawyer. And when Wilde got himself into his legal issues at the end of close of the 19th century, Carson was on the prosecution.
So for people who don't know this story, the love of Oscar Wilde's life was
Lord Alfred
Bosie.
Yeah.
And his father was the Marquess of Queensberry, who came up with the Marquess of Queensberry rules of boxing. And he hated that his son was gay, hated Oscar Wilde's flamboyance, they're running around together. And he said something like, he called Oscar Wilde he said he was a posing sodomite.
Yeah.
Those were the words that Oscar Wilde took a slander suit against Marquess of Queensberry, lost the suit, which opened him up for a countersuit, which is what done him in. And this is where
he goes to jail.
To use the Irish colloquialism, this is when your man, Carson, comes in. Yeah. I think it's so funny when Irish people go, "Oh, your man.
Yeah.
When you're talking, he's not my man. Why are you saying he's my man?
Piker man, yeah. And that's where he came in, yeah. But Carson was a major mover. The Home Rule movement, the constitutional nationalists in Ireland reformed, and in 1909 they supported the Liberal government, and from that we get the Home Rule movement. And then this is where Carson re-emerges as the Unionist Party. So eventually he moved to the north. He didn't move to the north of Ireland, but through the Belfast Protestants, where the Protestants had a majority, he formed the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force. And they were going to fight and create civil war if the Home Rule Parliament was granted. So, major figure in Irish history.
Wow. Yeah. So he's the one who cross-examined Oscar Wilde at this sodomy trial. So what? Back then, to be tested for? Didn't he have to have his butthole checked in court or something?
No. I don't know the mechanics of that kind of detail.
So what do you remember? Do you know any details of this trial when he?
Well, I mean,
because he basically defeats Oscar Wilde.
He defeats him, yeah.
In the legal battle of wits.
Yeah, and they knew each other well, and I suppose Carson would have known what buttons to press. But Carson, like, Wilde had an answer for everything. He's, you know, you can buy books and books and books of Oscar Wilde's quotes, but he wasn't able for Carson. And also as well, this was about class and about identity. Here was an Irish homosexual writer living at the very creme de la creme toast of late Victorian society, writing stinging critiques of our society. How dare you, old boy? You know, I mean, the portrait of Dorian Gray, the importance of being Oscar. Now, George Bernard Shaw did the same thing, and he was also from Dublin, but he was weird enough and involved enough in politics and stuff to kind of get around all that. But it was about, as well, who are you, man? Who do you think you are? Coming over here with your
dressing better than us,
yeah,
being funnier than all of us,
right,
holding all the attention at the parties better than us.
You know, so they were hitting him a slap as well. You know,
so that's his main connection to Galway is from coming here.
Yeah.
That makes that story even more remarkable. That because I pictured they were little kids here vacationing together, but
no, it was later.
If they were young men in their late teens, early 20s, that makes it even kind of more of a stab in the back.
Yeah, there is a little bit of research.
Which reminds me of my favorite Oscar Wilde quote.
A good friend stabs in the front.
True friends stab you in the front.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a Tory talking about Theresa May today, and they said, you know, are you going to move on Theresa May? We will stab her in the front with a smile. I mean, so it's Oscar is in everyday language. He's still.
I think Oscar Wilde was the first comedian. My opinion is the first comedians were. I think Mark Twain was truly the first stand-up comedian because he gave lectures and they were funny, and you know he did it standing up on a stage. Oscar Wilde was the first comedian before him, but he only performed on the page. He didn't.
Yeah, it was a salon culture as well. You know, I mean, you know, the Victorian gentleman went to a club in the afternoon, and it's like, you know, in Paris, 30 years later, before the internet, they'd have an argument in a coffee shop about a piece of classics, and they'd go to Joyce. He was Google, you know, and they'd know where to find him, and he'd sit there, be dressed, drinking, you know, white wine and smoking. He was a flaneur, you know, and he'd have the answer. And a lot could be said for the same thing with Wilde as well. In a previous generation in London, he held court, he went to gentlemen's clubs, he had long lunches, he drank, he smoked cigarettes, he had charm, and he resolved intellectual questions, pursuits, you know. So very bright guy, yeah.
Yeah, and every book of quotations is he's 60% of the book. Every book.
Yeah. The great Irish writer, the guy that wrote that book, Ulysses and Us, the one you read to read Ulysses, that's Declan Kyberd, and he's a professor of Irish literature at Notre Dame University in the States. And his recent book, After Ireland, which I can't recommend enough, and it's a literary analysis of the 20th century, essentially. But he said that Wilde was the first man to write a verbal opera, that it's the songs, the construction of the language is to imitate the construction of an opera and how it plays with your emotion.
In all of his works, or one specifically?
The Portrait of Dorian Gray specifically.
Okay.
But that's very common in Irish writers that go after that. Synge, Joyce, and more recent writers then like Tom Murphy, people like that. You know, they use the construction of opera to create the drama on the play. They give you heavy emotion and, you know, a Joycean linguistic clippity-cloppity-cloppity-clip. You know, he's creating sound with the words.
There's a rhythm in it.
Yeah. But he was obsessed with opera. That was his thing, you know. He used to play the piano, and Nora would stand on the balcony in Trieste when they lived in Trieste, and she would sing, and all these, you know, people were, who are these people? You know, I mean, they're strange, you know. And she would sing. She had a great voice as well.
Where did James Joyce die? Didn't he?
Zurich.
Okay.
In 1941, he had to leave Paris during the war, and he went to live in Zurich. He'd spent time in Zurich before that, and they welcomed him. But he had been unwell. He had lots of problems with his eyes, and he'd had some very, you know, invasive surgery before that. So he died in 1941. He's buried there. Okay, never won a Nobel Prize either. It's an interesting one because, you know, Yeats won a Nobel Prize in 1924. GBS, George Bernard Shaw, 1925.
What Yeats would you recommend reading for a beginner?
The stuff in the middle, September 1913, the political stuff is very interesting. The early stuff is not for me. It's
September 1913, that's a book?
It's a play about labour strikes in Dublin. The Easter 1916 play, For They Did Dream and They Did Die. You know, that's my favourite. That's where he is, you know. But yeah, the kind of he had three distinct. He lived a long time, 1865 to 1939. So I mean, you know, it was a long career, and it changed a lot as time went on. He became less mystic in the middle, became more political. Then, like a lot of the poets, he was a good friend of Ezra Pound. He lost hope in politics and even turned to quasi-fascism for a while in the 1930s. And he was definitely the weird uncle at the wedding. Do you know what I mean?
How did James Joyce turn to fascism?
No, not Joyce. Yeats. Pardon me. Yeats
turned to fascism.
Yeah, for briefly in a while. He was he wrote marching songs for a para-fascist, brief para-fascist organisation in Ireland called the Blue Shirts in the 1930s. But a lot of the poets, Desmond Fitzgerald, the First Minister for Foreign Affairs, he's the father of the Prime Minister from the 1980s, a lot of them turned towards weird, mystical, right-wing French Catholicism in the 30s. The writings of Jacques Maritain, all like an anti-Soviet, you know, they all went that way for a while. Joyce was beyond politics. He didn't, you know, you have to work really hard to find out where he was on politics. And when I mean that, you have to take a course in comparative literature in master's level to understand that, you know.
And well, that's why I have you to explain the complexities. Let's talk about. Oh, good, it's raining, so we can stretch this out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move further on the walking tour. You know, you moving down Shop Street. There's a castle, but it's now a bank. It's Lynch Castle.
Lynch's Castle, yeah.
So this is. I'm trying to imagine the period, because were there other castles that size and they just got knocked down?
There was
because it's not that big of a castle.
It's not that big, but basically, so towards that was built at the end 1470s, 1480s, right? Around that period. It's an example of high Gothic, Hiberno Gothic. Of course, after that, Baroque was born. So in Gothic, you take samples of the old and make them modern. So they took the Hiberno Romanesque circular windows. It's done in that. It's a townhouse. You know, like when you drive out to the stockbroker belt outside DC, right? And you get all these big mock mansions. So they're taking big, mock kind of Whitney mansions in the 30s and scaling them down to 12,000 square feet. That's what they were doing there. So it's like an old Hibernian Norman tower from the 12th century in shape and look, and scaled down with Gothic curls and, on the doors.
It's the McMansion of its day.
Exactly.
Interesting, because, to be honest with you, I've been coming to Ireland, to Galway for 20 years, but 20 years ago, the comedy was at the Cafe Cuba.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Remember, Cuba was great. It was a great dance club.
Yeah.
And that was where they had the comedy. I think it was every, Thursday or something. And then I always had to do the weekend in Dublin. So the gig was Wednesday. So you'd fly in, come to Galway for one day, and then you'd have to go to Dublin. And the first 5 years coming to Galway, would play there and party and do ecstasy and be drinking all night, and I'd get on the train the next morning to go back to Dublin, and I'd still be dance mode.
Yeah.
I'd be dancing all the way to Dublin. So I never noticed that castle. It just looked like a kind of a normal building until it's, you're walking down that street until it's, until you really take notice of it.
Yeah.
And there's really interesting gargoyles on it. Yeah. There's a gargoyle holding a baby or something.
Well, that's an interesting story. Because we were talking about myth earlier on, right? Yeah. How myth gets understood and so on and so forth. So, I don't want to sound like a smart arse, but I'm a historian, so facts matter. But there's a commonly misunderstood myth regarding that. So, motifs of animals holding babies is quite common in the late medieval period of architecture. You're going to find it all around Europe, so it's not unusual. But that particular myth of a monkey holding a baby is a really interesting one.
Then that's the one on the castle.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's a monkey.
It's a monkey. Well, it's 500 and something years old now, so it's a bit worn away, you know. But it is a monkey holding a baby. Now, after they built the castle, they put 3 crests on the top of the castle, 2 crests at the front of the castle. The one is Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, right? With no Tudor rose. It's the original Tudor coat of arms. Very rare, because Henry VIII pulled down all those old Tudor coats of arms, but it survived there. So it's unusual to have one on the main street in Galway. Henry VII, the Winter King, the guy, the first Tudor king. And next door to it is the Lynch coat of arms. So he rules the world and we rule the city. And on the other side of the building, you'll see a later added coat of arms for the House of Kildare. And the House of Kildare was the number 1 peerage in Ireland. They were the Fitzgerald family. They were the original Norman aristocrats of Ireland that survived from arrival from the north of France to battle in Hastings in 1066 up until, the House of Fitzgerald still exists to this present day. There is a guy called the Duke of Leinster. So why is that on the front of it? It's an interesting story. Their foundation myth, right, when they became aristocrats way back in the 13th century, the myth was that the John Fitzthomas Fitzgerald, who was the first Earl of Kildare, that when he was a little boy, the castle that he was asleep in, which is Maynooth Castle in Dublin, went on fire. And a monkey saved his life. Right? And that's the myth attached, a foundation myth attached to the origins of the House of Kildare. They became the Earls of Kildare. Now, what really happened was he kicked up a fuss, caused a civil war in Ireland. William Wallace rose up a civil war in Scotland. Edward I Longshanks needed an army to come over from Ireland to fight and defeat William Wallace. And in Ireland, the 2 great peers, the Fitzgeralds and the debunks from here in Galway, the Hall of the Red Earl, they were at civil war with each other. So he said, stop this messing immediately. And the best way to get rid of an idiot in an institution is to promote him. So he made him an Earl, right? He made him the Earl of Kildare. And he said, stop that. And reparations were made and so on and so forth. And the 2 armies, the de Burgh army and the Fitzgerald army, rode over to Scotland, whipped William Wallace's ass. De Burgh's daughter married Robert of Bruce, and his other daughter married the Earl of Kildare. And that's the foundation myth of the Earl. So when he gave him the coat of arms, on the coat of arms was a monkey. And at the bottom of it, in Latin, it says, sometimes you rely on the help of others. And that's where the origin of the Fitzgeralds come from. In 1504, 300 years later.
Because the kid was saved by a monkey.
Well, his life was saved by the fact that Longshanks, Edward I, needed his bloody army. He was a baron, kidnapping an earl. I should kill you and take everything and kill all your kids and your dogs. That's the rules. But I need your bloody army. So I'm going to make you an earl. And you watch it, boy. And that's why he put the monkey on there as a reminder of, and that's where the story comes. But it's a myth, it's a story to explain why there's a monkey on their coat of arms.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, now I can't not look at that building. Now when I look at it, I study those little, the little things on it, like the gargoyles and it's remarkable that it's a bank now.
It's a bank, and the other thing as well is that story is misunderstood, and that story is told as if the monkey was in the Lynch's castle and he saved the Lynch baby. That's not true. What happened was in 1504, the citizens of Galway, the burghers, they had the ability to elect a mayor for the first time, and they could control their own. Richard III, the great bad man of Shakespearean drama, he gave Galway its charter, right, in 1484. So it was a dubious mayoralty, right, and the other, rich families in the country were raiding Galway all the time and taking their stuff and knocking their walls. So the people of Galway went up to see the great Earl on Iarlamore, the Earl of Kildare, the 8th Earl of Kildare, and they asked him to come down and to defeat the Burkes and to defeat the O'Kellys. And they did that. And then the mayoralty was safe. And in honour of the great Earl, they put his coat of arms with the monkey up on one side, and they put the monkey over the door holding the baby. Because that's a Fitzgerald story, and it was him that defended. His son rose a rebellion against Henry VIII in the middle of Henry VIII's divorce. And Thomas Cromwell rode an army over here, arrested the entire house of Kildare, except one half-brother, and hung them all at Tyburn in London, drawn and quartered. And the house of Fitzgerald nearly died. One escapes and goes to Florence, because, of course, he was a Gerald. And, of course, the Mona Lisa is a Geraldini. And the Geraldini were a very powerful family, and they had this dubious connection as aristocrats with the Geraldini in Florence. So the one brother from the house of Fitzgerald, half-brother, escapes, goes to Florence under the protection of the Geraldini, and he becomes the master of horse for Cosimo Medici. And the family survive with the Medici in Florence right the way through the Renaissance. They come back in the 18th century, they bring back Freemasonry, Palladian architecture and art, and they become the Dukes of Leinster and so on and so forth. So really, you know, the plaque on the front of the building opens up a lot of stories. You're only getting a few of them, you know.
And I love that, you know, you debunked a few erroneous stories that I've heard originated in Galway. And so this Lynch castle, these are the same people where this family is where the Lynch mob comes from.
Well, yeah.
And this is a famous story.
It's a story.
And you explained it to me on this tour that that's not exactly accurate.
Because the story...
And it didn't happen at that castle. It was a few blocks from there, right?
Around the corner. But to see, the story is interesting. We go back to myth again, because when that story emerges, or apparently happened in Galway, it was at the time that the Lynch's castle was built, the late part of the 15th century, 1480s, 1490s. Now when Henry VII came to the throne, it was at the end of the Wars of the Roses. I'm not going to explain the Wars of the Roses, but Game of Thrones is inspired by the Wars of the Roses. And it was 11 wars in 18 years, succession to the English crown. So if you were living in Galway and you were loyal to the English king, who changed all the time, and they were in a constant state of civil war over there, right? I mean, they were killing each other.
Afraid to get the newspaper.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the news is bad. So you're in an English-controlled city furthest away on the west coast of Ireland, and a myth emerges about the mayor that respects the law so much he's going to hang his own son.
Because as the story goes, the son was raping women.
No, what happened was the son killed a Spanish merchant that put the eye on his girl. Now, it never happened. It's a myth.
Okay. The way I heard it, I thought he raped somebody, and then the dad was pissed.
Well, there's an endless amount of stories, but the point is that he's supposed to have hung his own son from a window. And now we do know that...
And that's where we get the term Lynch mob.
Apparently
so. But the way I heard the story, he said a mob comes and they want to hang the kid, and then the dad gives the son.
They wanted to
and
stop
so this group of people come into the Lynch family saying, we want to hang your rapist son, is where we get the term Lynch mob.
Okay.
And so now you're killing all of this.
I'm killing that. I love it. But see, the
facts matter. You said these words.
But the story of why there's a window there is an even more interesting story than that moral tale because that never... In 1492 we know Walter Lynch, the son of the mayor of Galway, fell off the bridge and the mobs were out in the street crying because they were so sad, right? But we don't have any record of anyone hanging anybody, right? The window was built in the mid part of the 19th century, and we're on about the expansion of tourism on the way down here. And in the 19th century they built railway lines into the west of Ireland, and they started to bring Victorian gentlemen to go and get the air in the west of Ireland, to go angling in Connemara, and rich men, the new petty bourgeois, come to Galway and go on holidays.
This big fancy wicker basket for Christmas. Where am I going to use it?
There you go. So they started to come here to go fishing. Now, the biggest businessman in Galway in that middle part of the 19th century was a priest called Father Peter Daly, right? And he was a rogue and an entrepreneur, and he built the train station where you were staying, and he built that
right next to it.
And he built that big hotel, the
Limerick.
Yeah.
Because it's the way I'm on the top floor and I'm looking down on the train station.
Yeah.
And the train station runs right up to the back of the hotel.
Absolutely.
And I was like, I wonder, was that like city planning?
No, it was the priest, because the priest owned all that land, and it was a slum. It was full of, poor people, and he cleared out all the poor people and then started a collection for the poor, and then he sold that land to the Great Southern Railway Line Company, and they built the original Great Southern.
And so was that the first big hotel?
Yeah, yeah.
People would just take the train and then
and stay there and But he had a big interest in land. He owned a lot of land. His family were the Dailies of Dunsandle, an old Catholic minor gentry family. He was a gangster. He had lots of different business interests, and he lived in his own private palatial palace 2-minute walk away from here. I'll show you when we're heading back into town.
I love that.
So he built the window. He built that window.
The Lynch window.
His name is on it. His name is on it. You know, his name is there.
But it's just a wall with a window.
And
so that wasn't part of a building that got knocked down.
No, he built it. And
so why the fuck build a wall with just a window in it?
Because it's a tourist trap. And that's
so he tells the story.
Yeah. And what he did was, the myth had always existed in various moving parts, and what he did was, he put the story together as a coherent story, gave the story to a local historian, brought out a band, got the bishop, published it in the paper. It happened.
And then he made a counterfeit archaeological site?
He gathered...
so the building was knocked down, we just have this wall with the window. Hey, take a look, everybody.
It's even more cynical than that. The myth apparently happened in 1490s, but the windows that you look at are ones that he gathered from building sites around, but are 17th century windows. So how can a 15th century event happen in the 17th century window? But the wall originally was the entrance into the graveyard, and over the blocked up gate you have a skull and crossbones, which looks macabre, but that's an example of all medieval graveyards. That graveyard was started in 1320, so the skull and crossbones is pertinent to the fact it's a graveyard. And then he built an extra layer on top of that door and put in 4 windows and put a plaque on it, and his name is on it.
Wow.
Right? So he developed it as a tourist trap, and when the gentlemen would arrive in Galway, they would get off the train, stay in the hotel, they would go for a walk down here to Wood Quay where we are, go fishing, and they would have some interesting stories to keep them amused before they went off to Connemara. And to
go fishing and stuff.
To go fishing. But the story of a gangster priest putting up a hooky window to trap tourists in Galway for an afternoon to stay in his hotel, that's a cool story.
Yeah, that's a book or a movie waiting to happen. So this priest is like rolling in cash.
A lot of cash, yeah. We have a lot of research on him as well. The Galway Archaeological Society, which is a very old and venerable society here in Galway, one of the editorial committee, who used to be a librarian called Tim Collins, great man, he did a lot of research into Father Peter Daly. So we have a lot of research into him. But what I find funny is that he built it as a tourist trap, and if you and I go down there now, or in the summertime, and stand there with coffee for an hour, there are busloads and busloads of Germans and Americans and European tourists, and they get this macabre, elaborate story about a man hanging his son from a window, and of course it's not really true.
And people are still telling this story like it's true.
Oh yeah.
And and that's why I loved your tour so much. And then to walk around Galway with you, and you're so knowledgeable about everything, and then this is quite a revelation. I mean, you could have just played along with the scam just for the sake of tourism.
No, man, can't do that. I'm sorry. I just can't. Because the thing about the thing about it is that, if you have people on, like, I've had on my tour, on a Thursday a Harvard professor, and then the next day I've had a Boston plumber. And I mean, the Boston plumber was really into Flann O'Brien, and the professor was really into Joyce. I mean, so everyone is, got an interest.
Who's Flann O'Brien?
Flann O'Brien was a guy called Brian O'Nolan, and he was a civil servant in Ireland. Some people say that his books predated postmodernist literature by 15 years.
And this plumber was into it?
Oh yeah, lots of people are into Flann O'Brien. The Third Policeman is his great masterpiece. Nothing happens, really.
What was the name of the book?
The Third Policeman.
You pronounced it right for me.
Yeah.
You were telling me about Orson Welles' time in Galway and the movie The Third Man.
The Third Man.
I kept saying The Third Man.
The Third Man.
That's hilarious.
If anyone
I would love to see Orson Welles' Third Man.
Well, but you should watch Orson
So what's
Welles.
this book? The book, we'll get to Orson in a minute. So tell me, I'm sorry to find humor in everything.
You're a comedian, man,
So what was the Flann O'Brien?
Oh, The Third Policeman. It's Flann wrote several books. he was on the there's a video of the original Bloomsday, which is now a national celebration of Joyce on the 16th of June every year. And the original Bloomsday happened in 1961, 6 years before Flann died. He was a degenerate alcoholic. I mean, really bad, and a government official and a journalist and a writer, and he wrote under the pseudonym Flann O'Brien because he was a civil servant, but he went on the first ever Ulysses, which is where all the writers in Dublin decided they would drink in every bar mentioned in Ulysses, and in the evening time they make it back out to Dunleary and they're all drunk, and we actually have footage of that. But he was part of that Dublin bohemian.
What year was that big pub crawl?
1960.
They filmed it.
They filmed the end of it, yeah. He wrote in the Irish Times, the paper of record back in the 1960s, he wrote a column called On Crushkeen Lawn, and he wrote under a pseudonym called Miles Nagapoline. Nagapoline in Irish is a small horse, and it was cutting satire of the Irish elites and the establishment and so on and so forth. And then he has this series of books then, but The Third Policeman is the best known of them. It can't really describe what it's about, but it's not as strange and as abstract as Joyce or Beckett. There is a story, but at the very end you have a dawning realisation.
Okay. I spend €100 every time I come to Galway at Charlie Burns. Buying great books. I'll go have a look for The Third Policeman. Another myth debunked, talking to you.
Yeah.
And it's the other great story. So, that Lynch mob is a great story, even though it turns out to be horseshit, and it blows my mind that, these gawking tourists are coming every year getting told the same lie.
Yeah.
And you're pointing out this factual window frame evidence that it was from the 17th century. This other story I've heard through the years coming here is the expression, I wouldn't give him the time of day.
Yeah, I've heard that one as well. I'm not too sure. I don't know.
So now, and so I when we met, I asked you about this, and so as the story goes, there were 9 original families that make up
14
Galway.
Yeah, but
there were 14 original families.
Yeah, they were the tribes, and they were called the tribes because the member of the family was elected mayor of Galway between the year 1484 and the Cromwellian settlement in 1652. So anyone that had a family member elected to tribes in that period is called a tribes. The tribes was a name given to them by the Cromwellian soldiers at the tribes of Galway. They were the old English of Galway. They've been there since 1236.
Well,
yeah, and these families, 26
it's a
families.
nice spot to be plunked.
Yeah, 26 families controlled
Back then,
Dublin.
and things were all underdeveloped.
Endless supply of fresh water, endless supply of fish, open to the sea. When you go out onto the bay in Galway and you catch, and when they came in 1236, they brought this thing called a compass, and they were French, Anglo-Normans, warrior aristocracy that built the city. And once they catch a trade wind, they end up in France. And the simplest explanation of it is that the other... Yeah, that's it. Wow. Because you end up and the English the English crown controlled a large part of France at this period as well. So the other English settlements were on the east coast, New Ross, Dundalk, Dublin, so on and so forth. So they traded with the North Sea and Wales and Britain particularly, whereas we were on the farthest west coast of Ireland, and there were no other towns, so it was like an English settlement surrounded by Gaelic Irish culture. You have a compass, you catch a trade wind, you end up in France. What do you bring back? Wine.
Nice.
And that's where their business and where their fortune came from over the next 400 years.
Wow, I love the history here. So this story, as it goes, so you get the 14 original family tribes of Galway, and there was one tribe family that were a bunch of assholes and nobody liked them. And they built a clock tower. And there was 4 sides and 4 clocks in all the different directions. And they purposefully didn't put a clock on this one side because that was the side facing the asshole family.
Yeah.
And that's where we get the expression, I wouldn't give them the time of day.
Yeah, I don't know. And I
shoot it down for me, Jonathan.
I could try and guess through it.
It's skeet shooting. I just threw the clay pigeon in the air. I want you to shoot this out of the sky.
The church has got a really unusual shape because it was built over a long period of time. So the original church was built there by Knights Templar in 1320, the first church settlement. So what you see, the church tower is much later, as in, into the 16th century. The last wing of the church was finished right before the Reformation really hit here in 1534. So the tower is a much later addition. It would have been built after, I'm thinking out loud here, it would have been built after the Reformation. So I don't know. It could be true, but I don't know. Because, the church...
Well, the Lynch mob story sounds more believable than the...
but the word Lynch
whole
mob...
town ganging up and, not putting a clock on one side of the tower because there's an asshole family nobody likes.
I don't know. I've never come across that in
It's a great story. Before I came to Galway, I always just pictured somebody with a watch, selfishly covering it up,
Yeah.
Wouldn't give him the time of day.
Wouldn't give him the time of day. It's very mean, Yeah.
So another great revelatory historic spot on your walking tour, and like the Lynch Castle, a place I walked past 9 million times and even drank in many times, and they do some nice soups at the King's Head pub.
Yeah.
I always thought, that's just a cute, clever name for a pub.
Yeah.
The King's Head.
Yeah.
And there's the actual story. For people who don't know the history, you mentioned Cromwell.
Yeah.
And Cromwell was the guy that
he
unseated the first. England killed a king.
Yeah, and Cromwell was the guy that... Okay, so basically the kings were the Stuart kings, Scottish kings that became kings of England after the death of Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's daughter. So, Stuart kings, the King James Bible that is still used today. That was the first Stuart king. So eventually his second son, Charles I, Stuart, became King of England. He tried to get the Scots to use this particular King James Bible. The Presbyterians in Scotland said, absolutely no way. They signed their name in a covenant of blood, and a war breaks out. Charles I gets his ass kicked, goes back to Parliament, asks Parliament, which he hadn't convened in years, but he asked Parliament for money to fund an army to go back up to Scotland and teach us Scots a lesson. Parliament revolted, largely led by Oliver Cromwell, who was a distant relation of Thomas Cromwell. And the Parliament split between parliamentarian forces led by Cromwell and the New Model Army, and the Royalist forces, the Roundheads, led by Charles I. English Civil War ensues. They call it the English Civil War. In Irish studies we call it the War of the Three Kingdoms, because it's a war in England, Scotland and Ireland that went on at the same time for three sets of interrelated but different reasons. Eventually, Charles I is beheaded and Cromwell defeats him in the English Civil War. And
so this is a remarkable moment in human history.
Yeah.
England has the chance
to become a republic.
Yeah. And free of fucking monarchy. And then that's what mystifies me about English history is why did they go back to
the biggest problem is that Cromwell was an asshole.
So he blew it.
They dug up his body and burned it years after he died. I mean, he was a Puritan Calvinist Protestant in the purest sense of the word.
And so that's how he rose up against Charles I?
Yeah, and tyranny, this idea that man, I answer to one man God.
With his religious zealotry is how he...
But he wasn't a worldly person. I mean, he wasn't reading anything else. That's all he was reading. So
I know lots of people like that.
The war developed... But at the very top of Cromwell's what was called the New Model Army was a man called General Stubbers. Now, eventually, when he beheaded the king, he sent off General Stubbers to Ireland, and over the next year, 700,000 people died. And that's, we could talk about that for a while, but we're not going to. It was awful. And the last stop in that murderous run through the country. Where he got defeated as well was to Galway. And Galway had big walls.
Cromwell was defeated in Galway?
No. The last stop in his kind of usurpation of Ireland was Galway. He went to Limerick, sieged the city, and then he went back to England and he let his commander Stubbers continue on to pacify Galway. Small city, rich, big walls around it, big cannons.
So he just murdered his way right through
Absolutely,
Ireland.
yeah.
Fucking up farms and families.
Taking the fireplaces out of houses. In the Irish language, to curse somebody, right, is Malartort. I curse you, I put a curse upon you. And the worst insult is Malart Cromwellort. I put the curse of Cromwell upon you. I mean, that's bad, man. That means everyone's going to kill your dogs. I mean, it's not good, you know. That's a really heavy insult in the Irish language. Malart Cromwellort. You know, eventually Stubbers comes to Galway, but the city had been locked up for so long and it becomes so unhygienic, waiting for the siege to come, that half the city had died of plague. So when they just knocked on the gate, there was no war. The rest of the country was on fire. So that Cromwell's army got in. I mean, what was the point in one last stand against this? They were going to burn everything. Came in, and the mayor of Galway lived in the building that's now the King's Head. He was a Lynch, take over the town, set up a military dictatorship, put the mayor out in the street, and Stubbers lived there.
So he's the guy that cut off the King's Head.
Yeah.
He was the executioner.
Much earlier. And this is
he cuts off Charles I's head.
But the myth is interesting, and we only solved it in 2006. An academic from here in Galway called Dr. Jackie Cunha was a great writer. She happened to find this roll, a letter, right, that went out, and eventually the Stuarts, after Cromwell died, the Stuarts came back to the throne in the shape of Charles II, Bonnie Prince Charlie, and a letter went out, and the letter said, "Where there is discord, let there be harmony. Let's move on. Let's forget about the past. Except for Stubbers. If you find him, kill him." And Stubbers was living in that building, which is now called the King's Head.
But he was hiding out in Galway.
Well, he was the mayor. He was in charge of Galway. He was in charge, you know. And he was also a Puritan Protestant. So he left in the middle of the night and went to live in Germany until William of Orange defeated the Stuarts, and he came back, and his family still live in Ireland to this day. But the myth that was solved was that when they had to behead the king, Cromwell had a problem finding an executioner, because if you kill someone and you're a Puritan Protestant, you're going to go to hell. You kill a king, man, that's regicide. That's not just any sin. So he put out this ruse: we have found some murderers from Ireland to come over to behead the king. And no, it was Stubbers that did it. And he brought over 2 people from Ireland and they wheeled them around. But it was Stubbers that wore the mask, and it was him that did the job. And then years later, it was him that took Galway, and it was him that was living here when the Stuarts came back to the throne. And that's when he disappeared. The name was only given to the pub in the 1970s.
Brilliant name.
Yeah.
That's great. And to think that's where the guy lived.
That beheaded Charles I.
Cut off Charles I's head. Jesus. And, you're the perfect kind of guy for me to become friends with here. I totally get off on history and literature, and you are an endless wellspring of fascinating information.
Well, it's all around, man, because, people in Galway still sit down and drink pints and coffee and engage in conversation. The best pub in the city is T Noctons. There's no television, and the Wi-Fi is crap, so you have to talk to each other, so you can go down there right now.
Where's T Noctons?
On the corner of Key Street, just up from Jury's, just up. It's an old medieval building built in 1490 on the corner of Key Street. It was the home of Richard Martin, Humanity Dick, the founder of the Royal Society Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Remarkable character. But you go in there, the pub hasn't changed since 1894, and right now, I guarantee you, they're just finished. But there's a group of gentlemen that's sitting there on a Friday and drink coffee and eat chowder and talk about this stuff, because it's important.
So it is important. Where you bring your Revolution tour into the modern era with the theater and stuff, and there's a whole layer of modern history I don't know about. I think I'm sure I mentioned this to you on the tour. My father, who I was very close with, his favorite film of all time was The Quiet Man.
Oh, yeah.
And it's John Wayne's best film.
Yeah.
And they filmed it in the Galway area.
Yeah.
And...
made by John Ford as well.
I was going to say, I forget what building, there's the...
That's the Euston School, because here in Galway, is it? The film school?
Yeah, there's I've seen his chair, and there's a little tiny memorial...
John Ford's family come from Connemara, from Spiddle. And his parents moved to, where did he grow up? I've forgotten now. Ohio, yeah. His family from Connemara. So this was him coming back to make this particular movie. Some of it was shot, the railway scene was shot about 10 miles from here in Ballyglunan railway station, which is now unfortunately closed. And a lot of it was shot down in Connemara and around the grounds of Ashford Castle. The co-producer was Lord Killallen, who was a descendant of the Joyce, who were the original tribes of Galway, the Joyce tribe, or Morris tribe, I'm sorry. And Lord Killallen was the president of the International Olympics Federation after Munich in the 1970s. And he was also from Spiddle. So he was a co-producer on the movie with the great John Ford. And this is John Wayne's. So it's romantic, you know.
It's romantic. And, you know, it's funny, my uncle died earlier this year, Robert Ryan. One of the proudest Irishmen America has ever seen.
Roberto Reen.
And he would always do the Irish accent from the movie, the cartoonish, you know, Top of the Morning and all that stuff. How are you? And I find it one of the greatest tragedies that the guy never came to Ireland and saw that the people in that movie
or a particular way,
that was like a very old.
It's a post-colonial identity, really. You know?
Yeah,
yes, sir, too, sir. You know, I mean, there's a cute conniving people.
The Irish people aren't like that movie.
Not particularly, no. No.
I mean, it's a great movie. The boxer kills someone, John Wayne,
and runs away.
Makes a vow never to fight again. Comes to Ireland, falls in love with Maureen O'Hara. Her brother's an asshole, and then the whole movie's building up to this fight where he's gonna have to, you know, reverse this vow and kick this asshole's ass. It's a great film. So, you know, there's so much modern history on top of the ancient history here, and I had no idea until you told me that Orson Welles had a history. I mean, there's been many great artists other than Tom Rhodes that have walked the cobblestones of Galway, Ireland.
Orson's a funny one, because Orson came here in 1933, and outside your hotel there's a beautiful little statue in our square of Pádraig O'Conra.
Is that the man by himself on the? I didn't know who that was.
Well, there was the original. Is a stone one which was put up in the square in 1934, carved by a man called Albert Power. It's in the City Museum now, and it was an icon of the city. You come to Galway, get off the train, you sit on Pádraig O'Conra's lap. And it's a small, unassuming man with a hat sitting amongst birds, and so on and so forth. Now, Patrick Conroy, like many well-educated Jesuit boys at the end of the 19th century, went to London, like George Bernard Shaw, became a literary critic, and wrote edited journals and so on and so forth. 1913, comes back to Galway for a conference right here in the Town Hall Theatre outside our window of the Gaelic League movement, the Romantic Nationalists, reacting to our friend we discussed, Mr. Carson. Then he decides to, fuck it, I'm leaving it all, the original hippie, and he just goes on the road, Kerouac style. And now he's from a rich family, okay, but he leaves his wife and kids in London and spends the next 20 years riding around Connemara, talking to his donkey and drinking illicit poaching whiskey and writing amazing modernist poetry in the Irish language. So he was a father figure of, you know, this frugal comfort, the man that lived for art and for the existence.
That's the man with the statue of?
Yeah, and he became a kind of representative.
Who abandoned his wife and kids.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah, but he chose to live for the art.
To celebrate that story.
He chose to live the art, you know, and he, you know, like imagine Kerouac and Cassidy in the night. They weren't the first people to do that. You know, this is what he did. And when he,
I'm a huge Van Morrison freak. You know that, and you know, Irish Rover,
roaming
the Irish countryside and being in touch with mysticism and the beauty of nature and all that. That is, for me, is a big romantic part of. Like, I love the movie The Quiet Man, but I know it's a cartoon version of an Irish stereotype. For me, the romantic vision of Ireland is that artistic wanderer.
Mover. He was a really bad alcoholic, and he died in his early 40s. And in 90 years ago this month, exactly 90 years ago this month, they opened the National Language Theatre of Ireland, which is on Tyvark here in Galway. Tyvark means ghost space. And the idea was they were going to open this National Language Theatre, a group of language intellectuals and writers here in Galway. And they were going to put Pádraig Keane in as a writer in residence, Sean Pádraig, as he was called, Old Pádraig here in Galway. And but he was at the end of his life. He was about to die. So they opened it 90 years ago. They put the night it opened, Pádraig Keane got on the stage. He made an idiot out of himself. They took him off the stage, and a few months later he died.
How did he make an idiot of him?
He was drunk.
Yeah. There was no structure.
No, he was all over the place.
He didn't have a strong opener.
No.
He didn't have a strong closer.
No.
He didn't make friends with the audience first.
He wasn't supposed to be on the stage. He just made it on there, you know. But he died, and when he died, now interestingly, the theatre was opened by two huge figures in Irish drama called Micheál Mac Límor and Hilton Edwards. Now they were an English openly gay couple that ran the Gate Theatre in Dublin, and Mac Límor's sister was married to the great Shakespearean actor Anu MacMaster, who was the great touring repertory Shakespearean early 20th century actor, right? So they come to Galway, they stay in Knockton's, they don't pay their bill, they open up this theatre, Pádraig Keane gets on the stage, gets off again, theatre is open. Sometime after that he dies, they publish his book in English, it goes to the States, it's called Ma Asal Beag Dove, My Little Black Donkey, and a young man called Orson Welles picks up the book, becomes kind of minorly obsessed with this roving, itinerant, intellectual poet, drinker, living on the edge, you know, day to day, and he runs away from home and comes to Ireland, comes to Galway looking for Pádraig Keane O'Conra, and he's told, well, listen, I'm sorry, Pádraig Keane's dead, man. You know, they're going to put a statue to him up next year in Eyre Square, but he's dead. So Wells goes down to meet Pádraig Keane's cousin, who lives down in the corner of the docks, dock number 1, bar number 1, still there. And he's a rogue, man. He's a writer and a messer and a rich boy and an actor and a storyteller and all these things. And he puts all these mad ideas in Orson Welles' head. You know, just do it, man. You know, buy the donkey. You know, do it. So Orson Welles buys a horse and cart, right, and then rides off to Connemara to paint fucking watercolours. And he's a shit watercolour artist. Everyone speaks Irish. He's a kid, and he's big, and he's arrogant, and he's American, and he's in Connemara, and he's with a horse and cart, and he's talking about Pádraig Keane O'Conra all the time. Disaster. He gets robbed, the horse gets sick, he can't paint, everyone's weird towards him, he leaves, comes back to Galway, dejected, meets Conroy again. Conroy wasn't going to let him get away. I'm going to Dublin. There's an audition on in the Gate. The boys, as they're known, that set up the Tyvark, they have another
the gay couple you were talking about.
Yeah, and they have another theatre in Dublin called the Gate Theatre, which is still there, still a very important place.
Not the Gaiety.
No, the Gate, right on the way up to at the top of O'Connell Street, that's the Gate Theatre. It was a modernist theatre. So they go up there, young Orson goes, and this is his first time ever putting his foot on a stage, gets on the stage, and of course he becomes Orson Welles very quickly.
The first time he ever performed was in Dublin.
Yeah,
wow.
And Micheál Mac Límor, who is the greatest Oscar Wilde actor of his generation, most famous, you can find it on YouTube, for his portrayal of the importance of being earnest, and his partner Hilton Edwards, who runs the theatre, is the lighting guy, the costume guy, the sets guy, the front of house guy, the quiet brooding genius in the background, whereas Mac Límor had the Oscar Wilde eyebrows, he wore the clothes, he had all the thing going on, and he stops Well, sorry, who are you, man? You know, I am Orson Welles. And where'd you come from? Well, I've been to such a stage school in New York. I've acted in Broadway. I've toured extensively. And the way McLeamer puts it, we knew instantly this kid was a total bullshitter. But all great actors are just great bullshitters, and they hire him. And he makes an appearance as Falstaff, and he stays there for 3 years, and this is where he gets his stage training on the stage from Machlimore, and in all the back stuff, the lighting, the costumes, the construction from Edwards. But after 3 years, there's only room on the stage for one big bull, and it's me, Micheál Machlimore. Bye-bye, Orson. Orson leaves, goes back to the States, and then he becomes Orson Welles. But Hilton Edwards was the production advisor, manager on The Third Man, which we talked about yesterday. He had a part to play in Citizen Kane, lighting and emotion. This was Hilton's big thing. And at the very end of Orson's career, he made one Shakespeare. He made Othello. And he casts Iago, the bad guy. It's Micheál Machlimore. So they had that love-hate, deep, we love each other and hate each other. You owe me money, I owe you money. You owe me money, I owe you money. And it went back and over. But, you know, Wells is on record, and there's a lot of interviews with him about Ireland and about Machlimore and about him starting in the world, and how curious the place was as well, you know. So that's
there's a great book. Have you ever read My Lunches with Orson?
No.
It's a really great book. This guy had lunch with Orson Welles like twice a week, and he just recorded him conversations, and he said you can record it, just I don't want to see the microphone. And it's a lot about showbiz and stuff. I can't remember if he mentioned Ireland and stuff. But what was the importance of The Third Man that you were?
It's a very famous movie because of how it's shot. It's shot in Vienna after the war. They created a lot of the bombed out city. Ideas like emotion and lighting that are very common in movies even to this day were introduced in this, and a lot of those ideas come from Hilton Edwards. A lot of that work comes from Hilton Edwards, but the dialogue in the movie is very famous as well, and there's a couple of great, very famous one-liners, and Wells acts in it, and he plays this elusive third man, and he's a scoundrel and a gangster, and you know, one of these very morally dubious characters, you know, where there's no good and bad, there's no right and wrong, there's just the way the world is. And that's a theme that you find in Irish drama a lot. Martin McDonagh, the new movie, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Yeah, great film.
Martin McDonagh was the first, he started working with the Druid Theatre in Galway in the 90s. And this is where he made them and they made him in many ways. But if you look at the movie, right, and moral ambiguity is one way of putting it, and you watch all his plays that have been running here in Galway since the 1990s, nearly 30 years now, there's no beginning, no middle and no end, and everyone is awful. And there is
the theatre?
In all these plays, yeah. And, you know, everyone's awful. Everyone's good and bad. And there's,
I see. I thought you meant the acting.
No, they're awful. People are just really dubious, you know, really dubious people, and that's what he's bringing through in these movies now, like
the duality of the human character. It's honesty.
Yeah, think about it. You know, there's the end, and it's over. Go out. You know, he's building a story in your head all the time that may or may not be happening. That's a theme in all the plays. So in the movie, 3 Billboards, you know, the whole cusp of the story depends upon the death of her daughter, but you never see that, and you're never explicitly told what happened or how it happened. So what he's doing is inviting you to construct the narrative in your head, and that's going to be different with everyone in the room. So that's what's going on there, and he does this in all the movies, in all the plays. The Cripple of Inishmaan, The Pillow Man, Hangman, they're all very Quentin Tarantino meets Harold Pinter meets Tom Murphy meets John Millington Singh. Blah, madness. Romanticism turns into people getting cut up on the stage very quickly, you know.
Is the Druid Theatre still an important spot in the Galway
Yeah, well, they tour.
Community?
They're still from here, but they've become an international company. I mean, they're
because again, I didn't know that existed until I took your walking tour. Well, and I've been coming here for fucking 20 years.
Well, they were a very important theatre company in Ireland right the way through the 1980s, an alternative theatre voice, and they worked primarily with the great Tom Murphy, who sadly passed away last May. Find him. And in the 1990s, they discovered Martin McDonagh, and from there, then that brought them to the East End in London, and B, Broadway, where the creative director of Druid, Gary Hines, became the first female ever to win a Tony Award for direction, and then that's what put Druid and McDonagh in. So right now they're in Dublin in the Abbey with Richard III, and recently I saw them do their Waiting for Godot, which was described by the British Literary Review as the most important production of Godot in a generation. It was that good.
Wow.
And I've seen Godot a lot of times, but that was a really good one. So they're still very important here, yeah.
Fantastic. I'll have to go see something there sometime. So we're nearing the end. This is Jesus. I could talk to you for days and days. And I heard this. I was a Steve Earle fan.
Oh yeah.
Through Jesus, since Copperhead Road, which a song he doesn't even recognize and perform. I've been a Steve Earle fan forever, and he came out with this album, Transcendental Blues.
Yeah.
And there's a song on there called Galway Girl.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that, and like before, now it's ubiquitous. You walk around Galway and you hear that song in every pub, every busker plays it, and it's really a phenomenal song. And I love it, and I thought it was.
I wonder, does he love it anymore?
Yeah, I wonder. Like he didn't like Copperhead Road because it became a big hit, and and that's what people expected to hear when they came to see him.
Yeah.
There are many. But I thought it was ballsy that Ed Sheeran would come out with a song called Galway Girl, which was one part poppy and
that's awful, terrible stuff.
I mean, the balls.
Yeah, but the thing about it is that he recorded that. Ed Sheeran has a long connection. His family are Irish, and when he was a kid, his family would come and visit Go in the summertime, and he'd go busking as a 14-year-old. So the busking tradition's been here a long time. So his exposure of getting out in the streets and playing music, he played here as a child. So he had this connection anyway, and he came back to record that song. But it had like 150 million hits in the first month. I mean, it's gone global. Whether it's any good or not.
His song is more well known than the
Steve Earle.
The Steve Earle.
But Steve Earle came here in the 1980s, the late 1980s, and at that time, Mike Scott from the Waterboys was here as well, recording Fisherman's Blues.
Love Fisherman's Blues.
It's a classic.
This Is the Sea, another great album.
Just a work of art from the beginning.
Jesus Christ, I love the Waterboys. And they recorded here just down the road.
In Spiddle. In the house that was owned by the Morris family, Lord Killallen, the guy that co-produced The Quiet Man. But he...
in that guy's house is where they recorded.
Yeah, in Spiddle House, yeah. I think their family had sold it to somebody else when Scott was there. But Steve Earle was here in the late 80s, and of course there was a very active scene of traditional Irish music in pubs and a lot of consumption of alcohol. He was getting his head and life straight. And Galway has a famous irreverence to fame. We don't care. Who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're a good man yourself. Can you play anything there? Good lad, sit down and play it. So we have this, we don't care if you're famous. So Mike Scott and people like that came here. Mike Scott still comes here a lot. You'll still see him on the streets. So that kind of familiarity is where we are. And he came here, Steve Earle spent a good bit of time, recorded with a lot of local artists and local musicians, took a big part in local pub scene, the Crane Bar, which has still got a session going 7 nights a week. And that's your man Steve Earle over there, will you give us a song? And but in the movie Treme, made by the great David Simon, which is about the New Orleans Hurricane Katrina,
Steve Earle consulted on.
Yeah, Steve Earle's in it, and he's the busker.
Wow.
And there's a pivotal moment at the end of one of the series where he's on the street singing the Galway girl, and then a massive event happens in the story. But it's amazing how David Simon can tap into this, and how it's about a hippie redneck called Steve Earle coming to Galway to get straight, you know. But the song, that's where it comes from originally. And some of the original musicians that recorded that with him back in...
Wasn't she the woman he's singing about? Wasn't she a local musician?
Yeah, there is several claimants to the crown.
Okay.
You know, but it might be...
See, now, like, because you're the guy who to debunk the...
It might be an amalgam.
These alternative facts I've heard.
It might be an amalgam of various women as well, you know. I mean, you're a country music royalty called Steve Earle, and you're probably a really decent human being as well. And you're in a small city like Galway, and you're playing tunes and drinking pints all the time. Yeah. I mean, you're going to run into some interesting, attractive local Galway women with black hair and blue eyes, and go for nice walks down by the Long Walk to clean your head out because you've been out drinking too late the night before. I mean...
What is the Long Walk? Salt Hill?
No, the Long Walk is just underneath Spanish Arch. Down there.
Okay. Because I think 6 years ago, something like that. I stayed out at Salt Hill, and I've stayed out there a couple times.
Yeah.
And that big long walk along the water.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Some of the most stunning sunsets I've ever seen in my life. So I just always imagined that was the old long walk.
Underneath the Spanish Arch, which is the old gate to the city, and walk out, the old sea gate to the city, and that walk up along where all those picture postcard image number 2, all the little pretty houses on the waterfront, that's the Long Walk. Okay. So if you were...
if anybody listening to this ever attempts that walk at Salt Hill, there are days where you could have the wind beat the shit out.
Oh yeah, but the tradition is that when you get to the end, Galway tradition is that you don't say I'm going to walk the prom in Galway, you say I'm going to kick the wall. And when you get to the very end, there's this retro cool 1950s diving board, and you'll see that's the end of the old prom. And from here to the end of the prom and back is 10 kilometres, and you're still in the city. So when you get to the end, you kick the wall. And you turn around and you come back again. So people say, I'm going to kick the wall. That means I'm going to go and
nice. That's
walk the prom.
It's a good exercise. What's the expression act the maggot? What's
I don't know.
That's Irish, isn't it?
It could be more of a Dublin thing, you know.
Okay.
Here in Galway, the old Irish language still often flowed through insults and descriptions a lot more. So a stupid boy is an Amadon. Useless boy, and a useless woman, a person that's not, because in rural communities people work hard, and if someone doesn't pull their weight they're useless, and so he's an Amadon, and if it's a woman she's an Oanchuch. So a lot of these strange little words still exist here, which is nice, you know.
I love it. Today's a very important day in Irish history. I don't know if you saw the news this morning, but Sinead O'Connor has converted to Islam.
Yeah, I saw that.
And the Pope put out a statement saying, "Thank Allah." I think that's really interesting about her. But I'm being facetious. Today's an important day in Irish history because you're voting on the president of Ireland. This guy Michael D. Higgins. He's the incumbent. It looks like he's going to win.
Yeah.
Again, everybody seems to really like this guy.
Yeah.
That's not really what I wanted to ask you about. Today's election, more importantly, is voting to decriminalize blasphemy.
Yeah.
And I think this is really huge in the once staunchly Catholic country.
Yeah.
Like the United States, we're going backwards. Ireland has decriminalized abortion, gay marriage, and now you're about to decriminalize blasphemy, where the United States, I think we are
trying to bring it in.
We're probably going to criminalize these things.
Well, the reason that they're getting rid of it, first of all, no one has been convicted of blasphemy in Ireland since 1855, and there was a guy burning books. So that's the last time it happened. It was on the statute books and was legislated for only in 2009.
So he was burning books?
Yeah, back in 1855. I'm not sure the exact details of it, but that's the last time it happened. So the reason that they want to take it out of our constitution, and we vote a lot in referendums in Ireland. We've amended the constitution, I think, 36 times. since 1937, so we do it a lot. And that's where the divorce referendum and the abortion referendum and all that comes from as well. But they want to take it out in case any other countries can use us as an example to introduce it, because it's almost quirky in ours now. It shouldn't be there. No, it's not something that comes up in the courts ever. So they want to take it out for that reason, in case it sets an example for anybody else.
I think it's a huge. It's a huge leap in Irish history, and the fact that you and I were talking this. I told you this on the walk over. Mm-hmm. With all this Brexit nonsense, it seems to me, in my pea brain understanding, that Ireland finally truly has independence from England, and the final nail in the coffin was their own stupidity with Brexit. Brexit is otherwise known as an existential crisis of English nationalism. Wow, what a perfect way to say that.
That's what it is. It's a little Englander. It is promoted as an anti-globalization stunt in order to deregulate their economy to be part of a bigger globalization plan. That's what one writer observed recently. But in a weird way, now we are part of the European 27, so they're negotiating with the European 27 and not with Ireland. So that's why they were in a corner. The European Union probably want to give them a lesson to beat them. The Irish government are reminding the European Union that Ireland took a fall during the recession and that they owe us. So now they're using this border in Ireland as a stumbling block on both sides of the negotiation. So the border is protected by the fact there is no border, that there is free movement between the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, comes from the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, which was a peace settlement negotiated by Senator George Mitchell, under the supervision of Clinton. And this is a peace settlement that ended a very dirty, long conflict. It's an internationally recognised peace treaty with the United Nations and the European Union. And part of leaving the European Union means that now that section of Northern Ireland that remains part of the British Union is now no longer part of the European Union. There are 137 border crossings in the entire Iron Curtain, Eastern Europe, from the Baltic, the whole way down is 137. In this little corner of Ireland, there are just under 300 border crossings. So if you're leaving the European Union, that means you have to put up custom controls. You're leaving a single market. So it's a catastrophic mindfuck of problems that the people that ran the Brexit campaign never gave any consideration to in any way, shape or form. They don't know anything about what went on up there because it's about English nationalism. It's not about Northern Ireland. So it's a mess.
It's the bit they forgot about.
But they never really cared,
Yeah, no, one of my oldest best friends from Galway here last night was telling me, in his opinion, this was the European Union's way of uniting one Ireland, taking that bit of Northern Ireland away from England would be the solution. But he was saying, and it was another person from Galway, we were having this conversation, and they both said in unison, we don't want it. Well, it would be too expensive. We can't afford it, and we don't want those people anyway.
Yeah, but it's a generation.
They're not like us.
Well, another way of looking at it is that the Irish government institutions like the Irish Tourist Board, very clever bunch of people, and the Industrial Development Authority, the IDA, also a very clever bunch of people. They've been building a kind of island-wide economy for the last 20 years since this treaty came in. So, the Wild Atlantic Way, the coastal drives, it's all melded into one. And this border didn't exist. And business we produce meat, they process it, they produce this, we sell that, And so the government have been creating this.
Economy.
Yeah, been creating this for the last 20 years. And now, with them leaving the European Union, that's all in jeopardy. But the real issue is that when in the Good Friday Agreement, when you have a majority of people that want a border poll, then there's a vote to join the Irish Republic or not. So it was 25 years ago, the Unionists were in the majority and had complete political control. Now it's 50-50. So in the next 15 years, if there was a vote, there would be the majority of people in the north who would vote to join, but the majority of people in the Republic would have to vote for them to join as well. So the minority, who were previously the majority, the Unionist people, they see this coming. So they hold the balance of power in Westminster right now, and but I don't think they're really living with the reality of what's going on.
Wouldn't it be ironic if one day Ireland could become one and the Republic voted against it?
Yeah, it's not something that... It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen, I think. There are people that, like your friends, that say, we don't want them, But, I mean, you have to understand the complexity of the society up there. It is very, very different. But understand what they came through. I mean, they started, inspired by Martin Luther King in the 1960s, marching for basic human rights. And these civil rights marches were crushed and beaten. And of course, when that happens, a violent state oppressing people, then you get a violent reaction. And that went on for a very long time, and 3,500 people died.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. It used to be, this is another thing that crossed my mind in the last few days, because we had all these pipe bombs sent in the mail to all these, Clinton, Obama, De Niro, all these prominent Democratic voices, and it's funny. I'm here when I get the news, and I thought, Ireland used to be the land of religious fanatics and pipe bombs, and now the United States is the land of religious fanatics and pipe bombs.
Well, the IRA stood down and went to constitutional political methods in the 1990s. The first ceasefire was 1994, but they were the original badass terrorists. They did some really awful things. But they are unrepentant, and they see it as part of a process with the Armalite in one hand and the ballot box in the other. And that was where they've come to today. Now Gerry Adams is retired, a new generation has emerged, strongly kind of feminist, soft left discourse, republicanism, inclusiveness, equality, so on and so forth. So that's where they are now.
They've evolved and matured, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. I love you, Jonathan Hannon. Anybody who's listening to this, if you come to Ireland, you have to come to Galway, because it's my favorite place. I would recommend going to eat at Moran's out on the...
Beautiful chowder.
One of the greatest seafood places, one of my favorite restaurants. And
did you like the Seamus Heaney poet on the poem on the wall?
I don't remember seeing it.
There's a Nobel Prize winner, Seamus Heaney, in 1995. He went in there one day and ate the oysters and was so moved by the oysters. He said, "Give me a paper," and he wrote a poem called "Oysters," and they framed it.
No shit.
Yeah, it's on the wall. It's in the back of the new part of the restaurant.
I'm gonna have to go there this visit.
Yeah,
check that out. But the last time I ate there was with John Cooper Clarke, who
get out of here, man! You're killing me.
He's a friend of mine. He's been on this podcast 3 or 4 times.
Oh yeah.
But before
my final dissertation,
we can talk about that after I cut this baby. I just want to strongly and fully endorse you, Jonathan Hannon, and the walkinghistory.ie is your website.
That's me, man.
Go to this, come to Galway. It's one of my favorite places on the planet Earth. And go on Jonathan's walking tour. The man is, we could talk for hours and hours. You're my favorite kind of human being.
Thank you, Tom.
Because you're filled with knowledge and...
But I'm glad you came back as well,
It's
good. It was glad you came back. It's good. I must have done something right,
Yeah, man, and it's great that we stayed in touch over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I truly admire and respect you. And
thank you very much. I'm honored.
I appreciate what you're doing for the human race.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the interview, Tom. Much appreciated. And the conversation will continue, because the day is young.
Indeed. In closing, is there any words of advice or wisdom that you'd like to give to the people of the earth?
Keep on keeping on. As Dylan would simply say, just keep. Well, yeah, we won't. Well, Beckett said that I am alive, I am here, I will die, and I have an irresistible urge to speak.
Wow.
So that's his concept of existence. You know.
I've never read him either. You need to walk me over to Charlie Burns and help me pick out some Yeats and Butler.
Some Beckett, man. Oof. It's the boy. Anyway, there you go.
Okay, Jonathan. Long may you run, my brother.
That's cool, man.
Long may you run.
Thank you.
Tom Rhodes, you're a funny man. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedian. Tom Rhodes, karate kick, baby, oh yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're a groovy dude. You go all around the world, telling jokes to all of the people. You are an international comedian. You're funny to everybody in every single country in the world. Tom Rhodes, I like you very much. I think you're talented and very wonderful. Tom Rhodes, you're the best guy in the world. I wanna be your friend, you should call me sometime. Here is my phone number, 603-644-0048. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedic sensation. Tom Rhodes, I like to listen to your podcast. Tom Rhodes, you're the best man to ever walk on the earth.